October 1st, 2015. 4:09 in the morning. Captain Michael Davidson stepped onto the bridge and looked around. The ship was listing 15 degrees to starboard. Green water had been pooling across the bow for 2 hours. Hurricane Joaquin was close. Davidson said, "There's nothing bad about this ride. I was sleeping like a baby." 3 hours and 30 minutes later, the voyage data recorder went silent. All 33 people aboard were gone. The recorder had captured everything, including the 17 hours before that moment when the chance to turn around had been given, ignored, and passed. This is what it contains. The Faro had a problem before she ever left the dock. She was 40 years old in 2015, built in 1975 at Sun Shipbuilding in Chester, Pennsylvania. Former crew called her a rust bucket. Shipyard workers in Tacoma who had serviced her during her Alaska runs later told federal investigators they would not have sailed her in the open ocean. When her structural condition made the Alaska route too risky, her owner, Maritime, did not send her to the scrapyard. They sent her south to the Caribbean and kept collecting revenue. By 2015, Toti was focused on a new fleet of liquefied natural gas-powered ships. The older vessels got less maintenance and less oversight. A master had resigned from the Faro that year. Another had resigned from her sister ship. Both cited the same things: poor training, lax maintenance, and a culture on the old vessels that nobody was managing anymore. The Faro was insured for $36 million. Captain Michael Davidson had been in command since May 2014. He was 53, from Windham, Maine. His father had been a captain before him. But bridge officers and crew used a specific term when describing him to federal investigators. They called him a stateroom captain, a man who commanded from a distance and who spent little time on deck with his crew. Davidson also had something else on his mind that fall. He wanted a transfer to one of Toti's new liquefied natural gas ships. He had been passed over once already. The NTSB final report noted that if Davidson believed his performance on this voyage would affect that decision, it may have made him more willing to accept risk than he otherwise would have been. On the evening of September 29th, he departed Jacksonville with 33 people aboard and a hurricane forming directly across his route. Tropical storm. Joaquin had developed 2 days earlier, north of the Bahamas. By departure, the National Hurricane Center had issued a warning area covering 73,000 square nautical miles directly across the Faro's planned track to San Juan. Davidson tracked the storm using the ship's Voyage system, a commercial weather service. The system had a problem that nobody on board fully understood. It delivered NHC data that was already 9 hours old on arrival. On September 30th, a technical anomaly caused it to send the same storm track twice, with no new information. By that afternoon, the storm position Davidson was navigating from was 21 hours out of date. The BVS was showing Joaquin's center between 57 and 111 miles further north than the actual position. He was steering away from a storm that had already moved. The ship had a second system, the Sutsea terminal, which received NHC advisories in near real time. Multiple officers were using it. They knew where Joaquin actually was. The 33 people aboard were not abstractions. Danielle Randolph was the second mate, 34, from Rockland, Maine. She had been tracking Joaquin through live news updates and the SATC terminal since before departure. She suggested alternate routes twice. On the morning of September 30th, she wrote to her mother, "Not sure if you've been following the weather at all, but there is a hurricane out here and we are headed straight into it." Her mother received the email. Daniel never came home. Dylan Mecklin was the third assistant engineer, 23, also from Rockland, and also a Maine Maritime Academy graduate, class of 2015. This was his first contract at sea. He had graduated 4 months earlier. His friend Keenan Eaton later said Dylan had helped him choose an engagement ring that spring. He was supposed to be a groomsman at the wedding. Frank Ham was the helmsman from Jacksonville, a large man and diabetic. He had taken the helm for this voyage. 5 of the 33 were Polish contract workers aboard since August, upgrading the ship's systems for a planned return to Alaska service. Their families later told investigators the men had never been shown where survival suits were stored and had not done a single emergency drill. In the hours before the storm hit, the crew made themselves heard. The helmsman asked whether the ship should turn around. The chief mate predicted a rough night. Randolph said aloud, "Nobody in their right mind would be driving into it." Davidson's response each time was that they were fine, 60 miles south of the eye, and he had seen worse in Alaska. At 8 p.m. on September 30th, he went to his cabin. The NTSB described this pattern in its final report. Davidson had formed what the agency called a mental model, an internal version of events that he reinforced regardless of incoming information. He expected Joaquin to turn north before reaching him. Every update that contradicted that belief arrived too late, was not opened, or was set aside. The sister ship El Yunque, heading back to Jacksonville from San Juan, emailed Davidson that afternoon. Their captain had accelerated to get ahead of the storm. It appears to be steadily intensifying and tracking to the southwest. Davidson replied, "We should be on the backside by 8 a.m. on October 1st. He had not downloaded the most recent BVS update when he wrote that. The El Faro continued southeast at 20 knots. At 1:30 a.m. on October 1st, the El Faro exited the lee of San Salvador Island and entered the storm. The voyage data recorder picked up 55-knot winds almost immediately. Green water crossed the bow at 2:10 a.m. The off-course alarm sounded at 2:53 a.m. Randolph was on watch, fighting to hold course. At 3:22 a.m., she said simply, "Hello, Joaquin." She was relieved at 3:44 a.m. Davidson reached the bridge at 4:09 a.m. The BVS update that arrived at 5:03 a.m. showed Joaquin's eye 11 nautical miles southeast of the El Faro's position, sustained winds at 105 knots, gusts to 130 knots. Davidson did not open that update until an hour later. The main engine lube oil sump had not been maintained at the required minimum fill level of 27 inches. As the ship listed to starboard, the oil suction bellmouth began to lose prime. According to the National Transportation Safety Board engineering analysis, if pressure dropped entirely, The engine had approximately reserve lubrication for 8 minutes before the main reduction gear failed. That was a warning sitting in the ship's own maintenance records. Nobody had acted on it. If you want to follow more stories like this one, subscribe. There are more coming. Most people never heard about this part. The scuttle. At 5:52 a.m., a call came up from below. A hatch cover on deck 2, starboard side, was open, wide open. Seawater was pouring directly into hold 3. Davidson ordered the ship to come about to a heading of 350 degrees, nearly due north, wind on the starboard side. The intention was to bring the vessel upright enough for crew to close the hatch. What this maneuver did instead, it placed the lube oil sump in the worst possible orientation. As the ship shifted to a port list, the suction bellmouth lost prime entirely. At 6:10 a.m., Davidson said, "I think we just lost the plant." The Faro was adrift in a Category 4 hurricane. The eye was 11 miles away. Seas were 35 feet. You would think someone would have said something earlier. Nobody did. Hold 3 flooded faster than the bilge pumps could handle. Vehicles broke loose below decks. Water entered the engine room through ventilation ducts. At 6:59 a.m., Davidson called TOTY's emergency line. He reached a call center operator who put him on hold. When the call was reconnected, he was transferred not to an emergency response officer, but to a general representative. TOTY's emergency manual covered 2 scenarios: oil spills and security incidents. Nothing else. Davidson spelled out the ship's name letter by letter and asked for a qualified individual with Maritime Emergency Authority. "The clock is ticking," he said. The general alarm sounded at 7:26 a.m. The lifeboats were inaccessible. The open-hulled boats on the starboard side could not be boarded due to the list. The port side boats were already underwater. The 4 life rafts were unreachable. The Faro was built before 1986, when enclosed SOLAS lifeboats became mandatory for new vessels. She had never been required to upgrade them. Marine Board of Investigation Chairman Captain Jason Neubauer told reporters afterward, "Our survival experts said the crew could have had a chance with modern enclosed boats." Frank Ham could not move. He was at the helm station on the bridge. The deck had tilted past the point where he could keep his footing. Davidson reached for him. He told him not to panic. "My feet are slipping. I'm going down," Ham said. "You're not going down. Come on," Davidson said. "I'm a goner," Ham said. Davidson stayed. At 7:39 a.m., the VDR stopped recording. All 33 perished. The SS Faro was the worst loss of a US-flagged vessel in more than 30 years. No bodies were formally recovered. The search lasted 7 days. 50 air and surface sorties searched more than 240,000 square miles. On October 4th, a Navy P-8 Poseidon spotted a figure in an immersion suit, waving from the water. The helicopter crew diverted, marking the first location with a buoy. When they reached the second position, there was nothing. When they returned for the first, the marker had failed. The buoy was gone. The person was never found. Frank Ham's hard hat washed ashore on Ormond Beach, Florida in December 2015. The wreck was located on November 1st, 2015, at a depth of 15,250 feet. The hull rested upright on the ocean floor, the stern buried in approximately 30 feet of sediment. The bridge had separated during the sinking and lay apart on the ocean floor. The VDR was attached to its mast. 3 expeditions were required to retrieve it. In April 2016, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution research vessel Atlantis located the VDR by the flash of its reflective tape under a deep-sea vehicle's strobe light. In August 2016, the Navy tug Apache pulled it up and transported it to NTSB headquarters in Washington. It still worked. 26 hours of audio. The NTSB determined 10 hours were relevant. The resulting transcript was the longest the agency had ever produced from a single maritime accident. The NTSB published its final report in December 2017. Probable cause: the captain's failure to avoid Joaquin, his failure to use current weather information, his late decision to muster the crew. 81 findings, 53 safety recommendations. The Coast Guard found open lifeboats still in use on 45 American vessels afterward. Congress passed the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2018, mandating enclosed lifeboats, high water alarms, and improved emergency beacons. El Yunque, the El Faro's sister ship, was inspected and found to have the same corroded ventilation ducts. Tote scrapped her in August 2016. On the bridge of the El Faro, in the early hours of September 30th, as the ship moved into the weather, Davidson turned to his crew and said, "We are going to be fine. Not should be. We are going to be fine." The VDR recorded that too. It recorded everything. It lay on the ocean floor for 11 months. It still worked when they pulled it up. The machine outlasted the men. Dylan Mecklин's friends held a ceremony at Somerset Resort in Rockport, Maine. More than 500 people came. His friend Keenan Eaton spoke. He said Dylan's spot as a groomsman would stay open. Danielle Randolph's mother still has the email. If stories like this one matter to you, subscribe. There are more coming.